Hi, sir. Good evening.
Good evening.
Good evening, sir.
Ganyan. Just fix this. Load ko lang yung slide.
Sir, can I ask a question about the paper, if that's okay?
Sige, sure. Wala pang class. Go ahead. Sige.
Sir, diba in the parang here in the canvas, it says here na parang what SGDs align with the poverty. Does that mean in a good way? Or like can we say like for example, city XYZ is impoverished, which means that they do not yet fully align with the SGD goal of zero hunger, parang something like that.
You can approach it in different ways. Pwede rin parang you can cite the positives. No? They're on track. No? These indicators are doing good. Mukha naman. Therefore, they're aligned to meeting the SDGs. The second can be what you just mentioned. No? Parang they're problematic in these areas, and these actually coincide with SDG 1, SDG 2, 3, ganun. Parang matching, di ba? So you can approach it in either way. No? What I really want to see lang naman is you connect it to the lessons in Module 1, to the SDG. So yun, either the positive, they're on track to meeting so-and-so SDGs, or the negative. Or both. Ikaw, it's up to you. No? Although if it's 2 pages, siguro, just stick to one angle, di ba? And I would suggest, and many have done this before, you focus on the negatives if you want, no? From the start to the end, di ba? Kasi you're trying to diagnose the problem. So you stick to the negative part until you reach the ano. So pwedeng negative yung angle mo for the alignment to the SDGs. It's the indicators, not necessarily the meeting the goals.
Thank you, sir.
I hope that's clear. Yeah.
Yes, sir.
Sige lang. I will just load the konti pa lang tayo. Let's give it maybe a few more minutes. I'll just load the deck. Okay. Share screen. One. Share. You can see it, no?
Yes, sir.
Sir. Okay. Pointers. Pointer, pointer. All right. Okay, let's wait maybe for a minute or two while others are trickling in. I hope you guys are doing well, no? Hopefully, not too stressed with other classes. How many classes do you have right now? 5 at the same time, including this, or
Sir, I think our class, I think
6?
around 6 or 7, including NSTP.
Okay, so medyo mabigat, no? Do you guys prefer, like, based on your experience for a month already or more than a month, do you prefer now the quarter format or the semestral format?
Sir, I think quarter, because parang, di ba what happened was that, parang, it was quarter before, and then some students were getting kind of overwhelmed na the pace was so
That's right.
fast. So parang, what happened with some profs, instead of like spacing out the workload, it's like the same pace, tapos dinoble na lang yung requirements. So
Yeah,
like,
yeah.
the pace is still the same as the quarterly. It just is longer and more subjects.
No problem. Sige. Yeah, I mean, yeah, that's yun nga, kasi kami rin based on the feedback I got, no, the pace was kind of crazy. Although you had fewer classes, pero yung pace nga was a bit crazy.
Pero in
I think it's really divided. Like, sorry, Marco. I think
Sige, go ahead.
the parang people still, parang it's really divided talaga. Like, there's really those who prefer quarterly. Like, it's equal in terms of who likes what better. So there's really no, I feel like if there's a survey, I feel like it's going to be like 50. Yeah.
Okay. Interesting. Yun nga, kasi I would imagine some would prefer it because fewer classes, di ba? at the same time. Pag-quarter.
Pero in your class naman, sir, the pace is fine.
That's good. And I'm sure, no, siguro by the end of the semester, they'll do another survey, no, to get the pulse. Pero yun nga, I'm thinking, you get significant votes either way. No? So it is what it is. Although at least if we revert back to the semestral format, that's the status quo. Diba? So okay lang naman. All right, sige. Sige, we can start na, no? Again, like my class last night, I don't believe will be done. I will exceed an hour and a half. Siguro tops na. So, but it depends. If you have questions or comments, let me know. Of course, I don't check attendance. I record these sessions in case you have to leave early, or people who can't attend. Please let them know that this is being recorded. Remind them, no, it's being recorded, and I post this usually on the same night or the following day. All right, so module 3, just a few announcements first. Assignment 1. So again, reminder, the deadline is October 2, which is Saturday, 11:59. In the past, I was giving this as until Sunday. Kumbaga, for me, I consider the end of the week as Sunday. Diba? And most students naman, you use your weekends to study. And you have nowhere to go naman. Given the surge. No? So I had to make it Saturday kasi apparently we cannot. No? School policy says we can't set the deadlines on Sunday. That's why I made it Saturday. Pero 11:59 p.m. So I'm okay to accept late submissions, but it will get a 5-point deduction. But if you can't submit because of internet connectivity issues, you can submit late without penalty, but you should submit your paper in MS Word doc format. So I can see when the last date modified is. Kasi MS Word naman tracks that. So for everyone else, I prefer PDF. So same goes for succeeding assignments. This is already in your syllabus, these instructions. Just in terms of pacing yourselves, so you should already be more or less about to finish module 2, including the discussion boards, hopefully. And hopefully you have already started or will start module 3 from a few days ago to October 18. So yeah, because it's a semestral format, it's more spaced out. So you have roughly 3 weeks, my suggested pace to cover this. So I'll be posting module 4 before the end by October 18. Most likely much earlier. Just let me know, guys, if you have questions. Ito rin, so I've noticed, sometimes we have a big crowd or not. It depends, nagpa-fluctuate. So just not to be strict, but to make people responsible for their actions, especially if they can, but they're not attending synchronous sessions. If you, for example, send me an email saying, sir, I have a question ganito, but I've already covered it in a synchronous session and that student is absent, I will basically just refer to the recording because you should have, if you were in the class, you should have gotten it. Of course, not everyone has solid internet connection, pero I will still point you to the recording. So yun lang. So to the extent possible, I encourage everyone to attend the synchronous sessions. Kasi for me, it's really additional pointers for you guys, and it's a good summary or an overview of what you're learning in Canvas. So it's additional knowledge. And sometimes if it's too much information in Canvas, this is a good way of synthesizing what you've learned. So especially for assignment 2, I am still available for consultations after class today. But no one naman made an appointment, so I don't think anyone wants to consult with me tonight. Your next opportunity will be Friday between 3 to 5. So just as a reminder, I do not, the consultations are basically, you can ask about anything, any topic that you'd want to revisit, discuss, if you want me to clarify further, or you can also ask about the assignments. What I don't want to do is have a consultation where a student presents the initial draft of the assignment and then seeks for comments. Kasi that would be in a sense unfair to all the other classmates na. Kasi parang it's already helping you. But for the group assignments, let me think about it if I will allow that. Kasi if I will allow it, I will encourage it for all. No? For individual papers kasi it's harder kasi parang all of you will be consulting with me and I have 2 classes, so that's what, mga almost 60 yata kayo. So I can't do that. That's pretty crazy. For group assignment, no, number 2 and FIO, maybe, no, let me think about it. If you'd want to do consultations to run with me the first draft. All right. Any questions on the announcements? Wala naman. Okay. So now we go to module 3. No? So for those of you who have started this already, this will serve as a recap. No? But for those of you who haven't started module 3, this will be an introduction. So again, I expect that the deeper learning will happen on Canvas. This is just to provide summaries of what you're supposed to be learning on Canvas. So this evening in module 3, I'll be spacing out module 3 in 3 synchronous sessions. So this week, tonight, next week, as well as the following week. So we'll start with classical and neoclassical. Then we'll discuss structural Marxist dependency theories, and then capped off by sustainable development. So just to put this into context of the entire course, so we're done with examining problems, no, development challenges. Then we've covered under module 2, no, in module 2, how to measure those things. Now we're starting to learn what are some of the most well-known theories, how you can help address those problems. How can you grow the economy, and how can you address other things aside from GDP or the economy. So module 4 naman will go into specific policies. So module 3 is all about revisiting some of these old school and more modern paradigms on how you can grow the economy and address the other development challenges. All right, so we start, no? We start with the classical, really old school, no? There are 2 things that we will discuss here, no? Rostow and Harold Domar, very well-known economists. All right, at any point, if you guys have questions, of course, I will be asking for your participation later, and I'll throw a few questions as well. But let me go through this chart first, right? This is on Canvas as well. So Rostow stages of growth. No? This is one of the oldest, most classic growth paradigms. No? Kasi before, no, as we were discussing previously, enlarging the pie, no? Growth, meaning economic growth. No? That's the holy grail. No? Before that, parang growth lang. That's the most important thing. Of course, we know now that it's not just growth, no? But growth is still important. So Rostow has this sort of a stages of growth model by which he's saying that all countries start at a very low base and then eventually move up a certain ladder. There's this sort of step-by-step, stepwise ladder that they take, no, on a journey to higher development. So Rostow was saying all of us start here. Traditional society. Basically, when you say traditional society, that's very, para kang pumunta sa probinsya. It's very backward 6th-class municipality, limited technology, society, konti lang yung industries. There, agriculture is there, but it's not for commercial purposes, but more for subsistence farming. When you say subsistence farming, you eat what you grow. No? You don't necessarily sell what you grow because it's really for your home. So very backward, very basic. And then what happens is along the way, some families start growing more, and then they think, oh, they're growing surplus crops. No, they start selling their goods. They start selling services as well. So more commerce, happens. Even agriculture becomes not just for subsistence and not just for your own consumption, but it becomes a commercial enterprise. Then, yeah, you can now go to the next stage. There's more commerce that's happening. It's really triggered by commerce, by an interest, self-interest of let's say a family to earn more money. So I will sell some of what I have. So ganun siya. Preconditions for takeoff. Most developing countries are actually in this. They're saying the Philippines is actually sort of here, but almost here in the takeoff stage. Pero most developing countries are in the second and third steps. So the second, they call it the preconditions, kumbaga pabuelo na, so to speak. Now there's more commerce. The trick here is really commerce, kasi commerce basically facilitates more economic activity, and it facilitates more wealth creation, which can be used for lots of different things. So yeah, commercial exploitation of agriculture. There's also mining and other types of commerce. And then the country begins to install more infrastructure, to connect areas, to connect businesses, agriculture, industry, services, etc. And you now see an emergence of an elite, classes. In itong class, you have elites, you have middle class, you have lower class. Nagkakaroon na ng inequality. Whereas before, everyone was sort of egalitarian, medyo similar yung kanilang state. But now, because of commerce, some are taking more better advantage of it. More, then you have different income classes. And then, because of that installation of infrastructure, which enables more economic activity, then you now go to the takeoff stage. The takeoff stage really, and on canvas, we have Korea as an example. But Korea is actually much higher na. Nandito na sila sa maturity, or even some would argue here in the high mass consumption stage. The takeoff stage happens when the country is really becoming known to be a manufacturing hub. And we'll learn later on why manufacturing is really an important point, or strategy for trying to advance growth. So now you're known not just for selling things, you're also building things. So you're developing a deeper manufacturing sector, and not just specializing in one industry, pero iba-ibang klaseng manufacturing. So here, it's much deeper, and then once manufacturing really becomes a bigger chunk of your economy, it exceeds ito. Sabi nga ni Rosto, his sort of measures, if it exceeds 10% of national income or GDP, then you're now on your way to maturity. Maturity is basically a country. Look at the US, look at the Europe. The economy is diverse. They're known for so many things. There's a lot of manufacturing, high-tech stuff, low-tech stuff, services are there, innovations are there. So it's really more industries and deeper. So development of wider and deeper industrial and commercial base. So really known for so many things. And again, it creates a virtuous cycle, because the more you can build, the more you can sell, the more that there's income, jobs you create. So ang dami, all of these different interactions happen. So you continue growing your economy because there's additional economic production. And then the final stage, according to Rosto, is high mass consumption. Here, it's really, you're not just inward looking, but you're really known around the world. you're now selling stuff outside, no, globally. You exploit what we call comparative advantages. You start trading. No? You're now well known for things that other countries want to buy. So again, you like for example, Germany, when you want engineering stuff, no, metal works, yan. Germany, for example. So that's Rosto for you in a nutshell. If you want a good recap also, there's a short video on Canvas. So that's sort of the different stages. Again, if you have questions, just let me know. So what's wrong with the model? What's wrong with this? What do you think? What are some of the criticisms? What do you
Sir,
think? Yeah, go ahead.
maybe like the take-off part and the maturity until the high mass consumption, it really relies on capital. So like to develop from the commercial from agriculture to manufacturing, only those that have the capital to start manufacturing facilities will be really able to participate in the growth, while the rest that don't have capital might lag behind.
I guess that's true for a certain extent. But you know, the capital, where does capital come from? Capital comes from what you earn naman, di ba? So actually, the capital that you earn here, it can go here. But you're right, no. In many ways, no. If a country or the country's households or businesses don't have much capital, of course, you can't build things. So that's a fair criticism as well. But I would argue also on the flip side, no, these initial stages can help build that capital to a certain extent. But you're right, no, maybe you need more capital, maybe foreign or maybe additional capital that's external. So that's good as well. Anyone else? Sige. I'll go ahead, no. Sige. Thanks, Marco. So one criticism is development is not linear. Kasi ito, they were saying, see, it's like you have to go here and then here, here. No, actually, no. Many countries have proven that no, it's not necessarily linear. And sometimes there are overlapping features. So for example, high mass consumption, di ba, Rosto treats that as the end. Pero in some countries, there's a mix, no? You will have, let's say, Makati, you can say, and it's not, a country is not homogeneous. No? So you can have, for example, Makati, it's a good example, Makati and let's say the nearby areas, yung Calabarzon, or Laguna, etc., with very diverse commercial base, no? And high mass consumption. Pero marami pa ring mahirap. So you have like, you know, different features overlapping. No? So it's not necessarily, not just linear, no? It's also not mutually exclusive. The features are not mutually exclusive. They can actually coincide at the same time. So that's one. There are overlapping features. The second criticism, and I wrote this in Canvas as well, is their paradigm, Rosto's paradigm about agriculture. Maybe because Rosto was born, I think, in the early 1900s, no? Agriculture, to be fair to him, no, it was still a bit backward. No? Pero now, with modern technology, agriculture is not necessarily synonymous with being backward. No? If you have the likes of the Netherlands, for example, no? or countries, let's say Chile, no? Western European countries that export a lot of agriculture stuff, Australia, New Zealand, for example, they're not poor. They're not a traditional society. They've made money out of agriculture. So agriculture is not necessarily a bad thing, no? Especially if it's agribusiness. If it's beyond, kasi sa Philippines kasi it's usually you're just selling the crop. There it's turning the crop into something that's higher in value, no? And we'll learn more about value chains in module 4. which hopefully will be interesting for you guys because you guys are management students. So the concept of value chains will be useful for you. And he was also putting arbitrary shares. Sabi, oh, when it's 10% of this, that, parang he never actually provided any empirical proof of how he arrived at that number. But again, as we'll go through all of these different paradigms. I think we're going through 5 or 6 paradigms. We're not saying na it's totally bad or it's totally good. The point is we're examining paradigms and then trying to pick what are the strengths. Diba? It's when you're learning from experiences or something, even if it's not great in general or so-so lang siya, you pick the best parts or the good parts. So here, what we're trying to learn is what's good about Rosto. Yes, it has criticisms. There are a lot of criticisms, but there are also good things, good points that he was emphasizing. So 2 things. The point about the emphasis on investment and manufacturing. We'll learn more about investment later when we review how do we compute for GDP. The point about investment and manufacturing, the good thing with that, if a country builds infrastructure, builds more factories, etc., it facilitates commerce. The key really to boosting your overall economic productivity is to boost commerce. And how do you boost commerce? It's when you continue building things that can build things. Diba? That facilitates the building of things that you can sell domestically, outside. So the emphasis on investment, you invest in factories, infrastructure, etc., and manufacturing because you're building things that you can sell, facilitates commerce. When you facilitate commerce, more people get money, it's a virtuous cycle, then your GDP will likely grow. Yun lang naman yun. So regardless if there are criticisms, the emphasis on investment and manufacturing is actually solid. And up to today, and even in the long run, even in the future, this will still be an emphasis. It's just good practice for a country to incentivize investment and manufacturing build-up. All right. No questions on Rosto? Okay, no questions. I'll just keep going unless you have questions. Now we go to Harold and Dumar. I don't know if any of you guys might be too young. I don't know if any of you have watched these guys. This is actually Harold and Kumar, not Harold and Dumar. Just wanted to break the ice. Baka matutulog na kayo, some of you. All right. Maybe Isabel, you've watched Harold and Kumar. Used to be my favorite slapstick guys. Anyway, si Harold and Kumar, these are the real Harold and Kumar. So two economists as well. So similar to Rosto, we're going to study the model, the basic concept, then we'll criticize it, but then we'll also pick what are the strengths of the model. But before that, because I made a huge mistake last year when I was teaching management students. During my time, Economics 102 or Basic Economics was a requirement for all courses. Yun pala, that's no longer true, it's just required for economics majors and MECO and I think a few other courses for not all, so I think SOCSI 13 is sort of the basic econ for most, or sort of. So you might not be familiar with macroeconomics, basic macro. So this is a short review. And if you're not familiar with macroeconomics, basic lang naman to. No? I included links to videos, no, on the Canvas course. But I'll go through this, and I have an imperfect analogy. It's an analogy, but it's a bit imperfect. So again, remember, when you're talking about GDP, gross domestic product, it can either represent national income. So kung household siya, how much income the household earns, or national economic output, what it has produced. So what a household has produced. For example, it's a business. What kinds of things it has produced. So either income or production or productivity. So the traditional or classical way of computing for GDP, it has four main elements. C plus I plus G plus NX. The C and the G are more or less the same. They are spending. The C is the private consumption. The G is the public or government consumption. It's what you consume, no? So ito, no? It's the total goods and services that people like you and me, private citizens, buy. No, I buy a burger, I buy lechon baka from Andox, for example, or whatnot. No, that's good. I get a haircut outside, although thankfully my wife does my hair. It's easy actually. So even services are counted as GDP. No? So goods and services. So same thing with government. The G part is what government spends. So if they provide relief goods, no, for or ayuda, no, that's counted as as part of the G. No? Sorry, I got this slide from an American source. No? So it's federal, state, local. So for us, it's national and local government. So kung si mayor has a program on this, and the city hall pays so and so or spends so and so money for this good or service, that's counted towards G. The I part is investment. Investment naman is, when you think of investment, you think of, to help you just remember investment, think of factories. Mga ganun na lang. It's basically the inventory, the raw material. No? So it's what a business, for example, will need to operate the business. So additional inventory, rental, real estate, a plant, an equipment. Yun. So raw materials, no, yung inputs ninyo. So it's really think as a business. No? You invest in something to produce something. So that's the I part. The NX is exports minus imports. Exports is what the Philippines sells outside. X yan. Imports are what Filipinos buy from outside. So yung mga my wife loves Korean stuff. So bibili siya ng yung mga melona, for example, etc. Those are imports, for example. Exports naman, we sell, let's say, mga bananas to China or to the US or VCO, virgin coconut oil. That's imports. So the fourth element is you subtract exports minus imports. So T plus I plus G plus NX. By the way, before we go to the analogy, you guys probably hear this in the news, no? GDP, GNP. Does anyone know what the difference between GDP and GNP is?
Sir,
In a nutshell, go ahead.
right? I'm not sure if it might be opposite, but right, GNP is everything that's produced by people of that citizen. So it can like parang it's the example, it's the Philippine produced product all over the world, while GDP is only the things that are parang created within the Philippines only.
Correct. You're absolutely correct. So the quick mnemonic And some people use this, no? It's a bit imperfect, pero GDP, gross domestic product, you can also say gawa dito sa Pilipinas, no? GNP is gawa ng Pinoy. So that's sort of a useful shortcut for you. So yun, in terms of computation, it's practically the same, no? Pero it's just the source of, it's the origin of that consumption or production. Very good, very good. At least some of you know that. So going to the imperfect, sorry, this is an analogy, but just to sort of simplify things, I always like to make analogies kasi that's how ako, no, when I, as a learner, that's how I sort of digest it better. So let's use the barangay or a household or households in a barangay as an analogy. So let's just assume that all households in that barangay are home businesses, have home businesses. So consumption, no? How much local goods, local, kasi meron tayong imports mamaya, di ba? Sa NX. No? The C part is how much local goods quantified, no? Local goods as the family consume. For food, for schooling, for clothes, etc. So you add them all together. And you add all the spending of all the households in a barangay. Kung barangay yung unit of analysis natin. Investment is how much mom and dad have spent on inventory, equipment, supplies for the home business. Invest. No? Going back to here is the raw material, inventory, equipment. So imagine mom and dad have a home business. It's what they buy to produce. That's investment. Government is how much the barangay captain and the barangay, sorry for the typo, has spent for the barangay goods and services, no? If the barangay, no, ito hilig ng barangay, if they put 10 humps on one short street, no, that's government. That adds up to G. No? So all of those things that they spend for. Net exports, no? Remember, mom and dad have a home business, so net exports are how many how much, no, quantified nga in monetary terms, they were able to sell overseas, and then you deduct how much foreign goods they imported. Not necessarily for investment, not necessarily related. If they just imported, let's say, ice cream or chocolate, that has nothing to do with the business. Okay lang yun. That's still part of the N minus X. The X minus I pala to get to NX. You won't count the I. For example, they imported, they bought equipment outside, diba, for their business. Hindi counted yun dito because it's counted here sa investment. All right, so you add them all together in that barangay, then you have that GDP. And growth rate lang naman is it's how much it's getting bigger. So for example, from this year to the next year, it's growing by 5% or 10%. Para growth rate naman, and you've probably studied this as well. No? It's like, ito na lang. Just as an analogy for growth rates, just in case some of you are still grappling with what is GDP growth. No? Growth is like the basic computation is you deduct, for example, ito na lang, analogy natin. During the pandemic, many are saying maraming tumaba. No? So for example, the weight of growth na lang in terms of weight. No? So for example, a person was weighing 100 pounds. And then the person now, the person now is 120 pounds. So what you do if you want to compute the growth rate is 120 minus 100, which is 20, divided by 100. So that's the growth rate, which is 20%. It's the difference divided by the base, the before, not the after. So kung sinabi mong GDP growth is 6%, no, it grew by 6%. You deduct the total value and divide that by the base, no? The before, not the after. Just so you can visualize what GDP growth is, no? Or GNP growth for that matter. So now going to Hard and Dumar, I had to explain the C plus I plus G plus NX because the I part is important. Or higher than Dumar, and and most economists subscribe to this. No, so in economics, S equals I. It's practically the same. The S here refers to savings. It's very simple. No? Think of a household. No? Think of you. Think of yourselves. You have baon. No? You have your own allowance. No? Your allowance, let's say, is 200 pesos a day. You buy your lunch, your recess, whatever, or your coffee. You spend, let's say, 150 pesos. The 150 is your consumption. That's used up. The 50 is what you save. Yun lang naman yun. There are two sides. So when you have money, it's two sides to one coin. That money can either be consumed or the leftover is now savings. What economists are saying is the money that, let's say, Filipinos, in this economy, the money that you don't spend or you don't consume, you don't spend for consumption, let's say you don't use up, you can actually, that savings can be used for investment. Diba? So that's a basic concept in economics. And the main factors, there are two concepts that I'm going through before we discuss Harrod and Dumar. And the second thing that you have to remember when we're discussing Harrod and Dumar is there are three main factors of production: land, labor, and capital. This is very basic in economics. Capital here means, by the way, capital here is not money. Kasi you guys are management students, you're probably taking up finance, no? Kayo, not I don't know if you're taking up finance now or in the next semester, no? So capital here is not money, hindi siya capital. It's capital in the sense of durable goods. That's how it's defined in economics. Durable goods siya. Land. So to produce something, you need land, you need people to work on it, and capital, meaning the machine you're going to use. So think of capital as machines, or equipment, tractors, whatever. So those two things. So remember, before we jump into Harrod and Dumar, S equals I. What you don't spend, are treated as savings, and that's what you can use for investment. And then the main factors of production is you need land, you need people to work on it, and you need the machine to produce something. Basic. All right. So Harrod and Dumar, you don't have to sweat the math, especially in Todaro. No, there's a long derivation of the formula. Here, I'm simplifying it. No? The basic formula here is the rate of economic growth, no? Yung 5%, 6%. No? The Philippines, by the way, has been pre-pandemic, fortunately, scrap that. Before the pandemic, we were really solid. No? We were averaging 6% growth rates, which if you compare to other countries, was really superior. But because of the pandemic, na-erode na yung gains na yun. So that's the economic growth. We're growing by 5%, 6%, etc. Any country that exceeds 5%, more or less, the rule of thumb is, galing yan. Okay. So G is the rate of economic growth in percentage terms, equals the level of savings. Remember, what you don't consume, you can flow to savings, become savings, divided by K, or the capital output ratio. G equals SK. The capital output ratio, if you haven't seen this in Canvas yet, it's basically the additional output that the introduction of capital brings about. Capital meaning machines. So K is the amount of capital, capital output ratio, capital needed to increase output. Marginal product. The term marginal in economics is additional. So if I introduce, let's say, 100 million peso equipment, it will increase output by 20 million. Then that is, the capital output ratio is 5. The capital divided by the additional output it can produce. So it's a measure of how efficient that, how effective that machine or capital is. Again, capital is not money, it's machines or durable equipment. So going back to Harold and Dumar, example lang. This will be our basic example for the next 3 or 4 slides. Yun nga. So if I introduce, for example, if the equipment I have, I introduce in my shop, increases output by 20 million, the capital output ratio is 5. Okay, yeah. Now, if the level of savings, so the K is already 5. So if the level of savings is at 10%, S divided by K, di ba? 10%, then 10% divided by 5 gives you 2%. So if what that means is you have this level of savings, you have this level of machine efficiency, you expect an increase in economic output or GDP by 2%. That will be our basic example. This is our original assumption. So what Harold and Dumar were saying is there are 2 important pathways by which you can really boost growth or the rate of economic growth. And it's just mathematical. Diba? Sa math kasi, if you want to increase a number, kung function yan, for example, you can either increase the numerator, or decrease the denominator. So that's what we're going to explore next. So it's the S trying to influence S or trying to influence K. Increasing S or decreasing K. So let's take the example now. But remember this example. So let's revisit the previous example. So everything else constant, no? Dati kasi level of savings is 10, the capital output ratio is 5. What if we increase the savings rate? We go beyond 10, we increase it, we make it 15. Then mathematically, it becomes 3%. Diba? Kasi it's no longer 10, but now it's 15% divided by 5. Basic math, 3%. So one way to boost economic growth is savings. Because, again, S equals I, and I is a significant part of the overall computation. So it's also proven mathematically. So that's the S part. But there are 2 parts, diba? There's the S, the numerator, there's the denominator. Second way is, of course, increasing the productivity of capital. So going back to the base example, let's say the level of savings is 10%. Let's go back to 10%. Total equipment in the original example was K equals 5. No? Capital output ratio is 5. No? Now, kunyari, the business, I have a neighbor, sabi ng neighbor ko, there's this more advanced technology for the same price, 100 million pesos then. It's not as if I have 100 million in my pocket, but assume na lang. So, you buy that, you increase your output. Sige, so I buy it. So for the same price, 100 million, it's now no longer just able to increase output by 20 million, let's say 20 million yung worth ng goods ko before that I produced with this 100 million equipment. Now, no. Now that 100 million more advanced equipment is now able to increase output by 50 million instead of only 20 million, then your GDP or GNP growth will be 5%. Diba? Kasi you are able to reduce your capital output ratio. 2 na lang siya instead of 5. Diba? The higher the number, the more inefficient the capital is or the machine is. The lower, the better. Kasi nga, more bang for the buck. Basically, capital output ratio lang naman means more bang for the buck. And the emphasis here is if another way of boosting economic growth is we introduce more advanced technology because it will boost your productivity. So imagine if you combine both, no? You increase savings and then you introduce more advanced technology, then all the more that you expect GDP to grow. Just let me know if you have questions. But in any case, a more detailed discussion and multimedia resources are in Canvas. Same question. What are some of the criticisms of Harold and Dumar? What are some criticisms? There are actually 2 important criticisms. Anyone? Take a guess, even if you haven't gone through this module yet on Canvas. What do you think are the criticisms? Is it too simple? Is it? Take a wild guess.
Sorry. I think it might be hard to apply it to like underdeveloped countries.
Yes. Who's sorry? Who's speaking?
Marian.
Marian. Okay, there you go. Minsan may lag yung Zoom. Right? So perfect. No. Why is it not necessarily relevant for underdeveloped countries? Why were you able to say that? That's actually correct, no? But in what regard?
Because I feel like it kind of neglects like aspects of development. So I'm not super sure.
Yeah, no worries. You're on the right track. No? Let me help you. No? One of the criticisms of Harold and Dumar is this is a recipe that they're trying to sort of sell to the entire world. Now, you follow this recipe, your GDP will grow. The problem is, on the one hand, you're asking countries to increase their savings, no? Or the people in that country to increase their savings. Yun nga eh, if you're an underdeveloped country, you're a poor country, now kind of like a household, no? You're asking a poor household to increase their savings. If you're a poor household, what will be your response? Parang, ay, kulang na nga eh. What we're getting is already kulang for consumption. How the hell can you expect us to save more? Diba? So that's one of the criticisms. No? Parang it's so easy to say, oh, you increase savings, you flow it back to investment. But wait, what savings? Diba? If you're a poor country. So that's one. A more major criticism of Harold and Dumar is its lack of emphasis on labor. Diba, remember, there are 3 factors of production. You need 3 things for you to produce something. Land, labor, and capital. Capital meaning machines. What happened to the labor part? No? With the model, no, they were criticizing both economists na parang you're saying that labor productivity is the same. Whether the person finished high school or not, has a PhD or a master's or not, parang you're saying everyone has the same productivity, but that is not true. Diba? What we're seeing is more skilled people, more trained people, more educated people have higher productivity. They can produce more, no? Whether it's goods or services. So Hard and Domar did not cover labor productivity. Research has shown that more productive capital, no, and labor. It's not just capital that should be productive, but also labor. So you can have more positive effects. No? And here's a concept. You don't really have to remember this, no? But this is for additional information. There's a thing called total factor productivity. No? So it's basically what you, again, it's input output, diba? What you use so that you can build something. So there are two things, no? It's the efficiency of the machine or the durable equipment and the productivity of the labor. Imagine if the country invested in, let's say, very advanced labs, no? But majority of the population did not even finish high school. You'll not be able to take advantage of the advanced technology, for example. So that's an example lang. Diba? So it has to go hand in hand. While you're building your investment stock or your advanced machinery, you have to also build labor. And that's what we call, sorry, I'm throwing a lot of new terms for you, but you can revisit this in Canvas. It all boils down to what we call human capital. Diba? Capital kasi, in terms of machines, it's what you use to produce something. Human capital naman is what your potential. It's your potential to produce. If you have higher human capital, your tendencies, you can be of greater service to society, you can produce more if you're better trained, for example. So if you want a formal definition, there's an OECD definition. It's the knowledge, skills, competencies, and attributes embodied in individuals that facilitate the creation of personal, social, and economic well-being. So human capital, usually when people talk about boosting or improving human capital, it focuses on the capabilities. Go back to our module 2, the capabilities approach. It's what you will need to actualize or realize your full potential. So you have to be well-fed, you have to be well-nourished, you have to have a good education for you to reach your potential. That's human capital for you. It's your sense of your capacity to produce as a person, produce more. So again, it links back to Amartya Sen's capabilities approach. All right. Now again, as with Rosto, we're not totally shutting down just because there are criticisms. It doesn't mean we're shutting down the complete model. Again, no model, no economic paradigm or model is perfect. Voila, that's impossible. What we're trying to do is we're trying to go through different paradigms, different recipes, so to speak, criticizing them, but then picking what's good from each of them. So what are some of the good lessons from Harold and Domar and even Rosto? So the two classic models. One is it's focused on investment. Many economists, and even up to now, and this is sort of becoming like a gospel truth, which it is, if you ask me. You want to focus on investment rather than consumption. Diba? You want to, going back to the C plus I, you want to focus on this rather than the C part. Bakit? Simple lang. When you consume something, of course, it's good, because it adds up to the economic output, etc., etc. But when you consume something, that's it. If you eat a burger, that's it. Hindi na magre-resurrect yung burger and wala na. No? But if you focus on investment, if you build factories, you build machines, you invest in that, you build inventory, it keeps building. So it doesn't end. When you introduce new technology, it doesn't end there. That leads to building things. And building things will lead to more production. You can sell that, more jobs generated, more consumption. It actually has a lot of spillover effects. Versus consumption, where you buy something, you buy an ice cream and that's it. Ito, you build things and you sell things. So it keeps on growing. So it's a virtuous growth cycle. And going back to Rosto, no, it's diversifying investment also, no, manufacturing. It's good if you really can manufacture. And we'll go to a little bit about, we'll talk about manufacturing a little bit next week. No? Sorry, in module 4, when we talk about value chains as well. And also focus on people. This is not part of the models, but this is a learning based on the inadequacies of both models. But it's actually implied in Rosto. No? Kasi in Rosto, parang sinasabi, the more educated your people are and then you have an affluent class, the better. And another weakness of Howard and Dumar, no, is, ito na yun, just like what I think Marco mentioned earlier, it's, of course, hindi pa uso that time in globalization, but both Howard and Dumar were thinking domestic only. No? But you can also get investment from the outside. It's not only derived from domestic savings that's translated into investment. No, you can actually, and this is what China has been doing, Thailand, Vietnam, they're actually tapping or attracting other countries to be the ones investing. Diba? So it doesn't force them to save money. Kasi may external source of investment, not just the savings, but foreign investment. So yes, S equals I, no, but there are other sources of I and not just domestic savings, foreign savings. So yun. So those are the lessons. No? What you need to grow in the economy, focus on investment to the extent possible, manufacturing, and you attract foreign investment so that it's the domestic industries are not pressured to be the ones churning economic productivity all the time. And I provided a case study there. It's a discussion board. The case of South Korea. So just ask you guys to reflect on the South Korea case in terms of the Rosto and or the Harold Domar model. So I won't discuss that now because that's part of your discussion board. All right. Just let me know if you have questions. All right. Now, this is the last part of tonight's class. Neoclassical. The reason why it's called neoclassical is classical economics is basically, it's the pure classical economics is all about supply and demand. You follow supply and demand. If you have the markets, diba, if mabenta to, it's just a factor of supply and demand. Nothing else matters. Neoclassical, it's sort of a recasting of that supply and demand in a larger context. So in basic economics, there are two major things that students will probably never forget. Ako, when I was doing my basic economics, one is supply and demand. That's very, very, very basic. Most of you even learned that in high school. The second thing that I will never forget, and most people, is like Adam Smith's invisible hand. I think this was written in the 1700s or 1800s. I don't remember anymore. So you don't have to read the entire passage. No? He came up with the book called The Wealth of Nations. Basically, he was saying that supply and demand is the be all and end all. You have to let that dictate how the economy is run. Basically, the term is called laissez-faire. Laissez-faire, I don't even know if that's the correct pronunciation. It's a French term meaning anything goes, unrestrained. It's basically saying, Adam Smith is basically saying, just let businesses, no, the rich and the businesses, the capitalists, etc., let them free, because there is as if an invisible hand, no, that sort of leads these rich capitalists and government to actually determine things or buy things, sell things, and that will eventually uh, satisfy everyone's needs without intending it. It's the self-interest because I'm a capitalist, I want to engage in a business. All the capitalists and all the businesses that we come up with will eventually solve everyone without intending, no, it. So it will sort of, economists will always like to say, it will always fall into equilibrium, a good balance. People's needs are met because of the self-interest of the capitalists, because they engage in goods and services that people will eventually need, that will redound to them. So it's parang may invisible hand, no? No one is directing them to do it, but because of self-interest, because of the businesses that they create, they will solve employment, they will solve housing, they will solve all of these SDGs. But the question is that correct? Is that correct? No? Neoclassical is synonymous to free markets, pure free markets. The question is the invisible hand this, or is it really this? Because the Adam Smith disciples were all about, oh, government, back off. Corporate interests, capitalists, corporations, businesses, they know what's good. So just let them run wild. Let them do it. Eventually, everything will be solved. But sometimes what ends up happening is if it's just laissez-faire, free markets, this happens. There's huge inequality. So that is sometimes the problem with free market capitalism. If it's just, sige, let them be. So laissez-faire is basically anything goes. The problem with laissez-faire is, there's these are other concepts. It can lead to market failure and externalities. Let me explain these terms quickly. Market failure is that, no? Ito, for example, this picture, no? The invisible hand kasi, the premise is, eventually the businesses will build low-cost housing that, will address the problems of the homeless people. But the market failure is, when you say it's market failure, no. The business, the private corporations, whatever they're producing, is actually not meeting certain needs, such as housing. So that's a market failure. Ibig sabihin, the market failed in addressing a need, an unmet need. So that's a market failure. And we'll go to that later. I'll go through the 4 bullets. Externalities naman. Sige, sorry. Let's just discuss market failure now. So market failure, an example here is the lack of production nga by business sector. No? So another example is not just housing. No? Kasi of course, when you're business-minded, more often than not, your primary goal is the profit, no? To make profit. So another example is of a market failure is far-flung areas. There is no internet connection. Why? Because you don't expect PLDT or Smart to build an expensive tower with all the phone lines for a few households lang. Diba? Far-flung areas, usually konti lang tower. So that is a market failure. No? It's a failure of the market, meaning the business sector, to provide. Not because it's their fault, no? Because talagang there's no money to be made. And that's why it's called a market failure. It's lack of production by the business sector. So many people are arguing you can't just let businesses determine things. No, you also need government, because sometimes there is market failure and government needs to step in because they're not incentivized enough. Low cost housing, there are bits and pieces, no, pero kulang pa din. That's another market failure. It means the demand is not met by the supply, by the private sector. So someone else has to step in, and guess who? Of course, that's government. If the business sector is not able to respond, so that's a market failure. Another group is externalities. Externalities is basically, think of yourself as a business. It's something I do for my own business, but it can have unintended effects to the surrounding communities or to other unrelated group of stakeholders. So the classic example, and it can be positive or negative. It doesn't have to be purely negative. So the classic example of a negative externality is pollution. So I am a factory, I will produce, no, because I need this for my business. Pero yung exhaust ko coming from my factory, the smoke and clog, it affects other people. So that's bad. So that's an externality. Positive externality naman, I'm a business, I'm an agribusiness, I need to transport what I buy from the farm to my business. So I will, my own money, I will pay to build the road. And then I'll let other people use it for free. That's a positive externality kasi it's for your business, but there are spillover effects. So it can be either positive or negative. And the reason why we're examining all of these things, it's proving that you cannot, and later, no, we'll discuss this more. No? It's proving that you cannot just let businesses run wild. There's also a role for government. Another thing is sometimes it's not in the domain of the private sector. No? So military protection, for example, you expect government to provide that, not necessarily businesses can provide the hardware, the uniforms, the weapons, etc., but not the service of protecting people. Sometimes not all services or goods should be provided by the business sector. Sometimes it's inherently a government function. And the last risk of a laissez-faire position or a unfettered free market stance or paradigm is abuse of dominant position. When you say abuse of dominant position, what's a good example here? Predatory pricing, for example. Kunyari lang, I'm not accusing SM of this. There's, for example, there's this neighborhood. And SMCs, there's a lot of small mom and pop stores, sari-sari stores that are thriving, small eateries, food parks, etc. There's a market, I will go there. So I build a mall, a mini mall here with Save More there. What will I do? Sige. What I'll do first is I will intentionally lower my price below cost. I will absorb losses first. So what ends up happening is the mom and pop stores, the small sari-sari stores, the food parks, they start losing business, they close down. And once I have a virtual monopoly, I will now start jacking up the price to recover my losses. Kasi when you say dominant position, I'm a big player, kind of like a big conglomerate like SM. I can abuse my bigness, my largeness. So I can do some dirty tricks. So these are all risks. If you just let the markets just go for it, without any constraints. So the question is it bad? No? So is capitalism bad? Are free markets bad? Should we actually reverse course? Wag na lang, no? Parang, kasi the Philippines is under a capitalist structure, the US, most modern societies. But kita nga natin, if you just leave it unchecked, no, it's really bad. No? You've probably seen this, no, the Occupy Wall Street, no, a few years ago, no, they were for a sort of a good philosophy naman, kasi Wall Street guys were really the epitome of what of the common parang perspective of people about big business, no, na parang they're just selfish, they rig the economy for their own gain, etc., etc. So there was a sort of a movement globally, no, that was trying sort of an anti-capitalist movement at that time. So do we do that or not? My answer there is no. In many cases, as I keep mentioning, and we will be discussing this more in Module 5, and you'll learn this more on Canvas, is in many cases, it's the private sector that provides expertise, innovation, cutting-edge technology. We wouldn't have vaccines by now, no, if it weren't for adequate vaccines, if it weren't for the private sector. No? Sometimes it's really the profit motive that unfortunately, that makes people move and corporations move to provide things. So in many cases, they actually respond to things that people need. But the key lesson here is the major criticism is because if you leave capitalism unchecked or unfettered or unabated, whatever synonym you want, it can lead to these things. So we cannot just follow Adam Smith purely. No? Yes, the basic premise of capitalism is good. Private sector can provide goods and services that people need, sometimes better, faster than governments. But government has a role. Some goods and services, it has to be government to provide. And in some ways, government sets the rules. So governments can set rules to make sure that the free markets don't run wild. We call that regulation. You can write certain laws that keep businesses in check. So for example, right now, before you can even build your store or factory, you need an environmental clearance. It's keeping businesses in check. Kasi there may be a few bad apples, no? But it can wreak havoc. No? Malay mo, kung wala ng permit, anyone can build a business, sometimes at the expense of the environment. So we don't need to reverse course. We need to make sure the market doesn't run wild. So you need government to keep them in check. But not too much. Yun nga, it's like your parents, no? Especially when you're growing older, you have your complete faculties na. There's this, it's more art than science sometimes. No? It's both. No? Parang, to what extent should government keep a check? No? Should it be very closely or just from a distance? Sakal ba sa leeg? Parang an analogy is you and your parents. No? You want to do this, but your parents are like, no, you don't do this. So government should not be like a nagging parent. It should be like, sige, let it go, pero make sure that there are certain things that are non-negotiable. Parang gano'n. So that's our stance. And before we end this tonight's discussion, we had a good discussion last night in my other class. I don't believe, I'm not sure if I actually included this in Canvas. Because this is not, just for the record, this is not an official Ateneo stance. One of the philosophies I subscribe to, and this is for your own determination, it's up to you. One of my ideal structure is a social democracy paradigm. Not socialist, iba yun. If you want more materials on this, I can send you more materials on this. So for consideration, a social democracy paradigm. So ito, I highlighted this in bold. What the paradigm I subscribe to is simple. It's still capitalist, it's still democratic, kasi socialism kasi government dictates. Ito hindi, no. Government does not dictate. It's capitalist, it's democratic, meaning government can force you except for certain non-negotiables. But no, there is emphasis on social justice. Diba? Ateneo will keep on emphasizing social justice. Yun nga, capitalism ka, konting elements of Adam Smith there, no? But government has a role to play, no? And government will introduce a lot of what we call social justice features like income redistribution, your regulation of the economy, making sure that businesses are in check, and a lot of social welfare provisions. So a lot of, let's say, SSS, free education, free healthcare, etc., etc. Hopefully the government can afford it. So this is a paradigm I subscribe to. I don't subscribe to socialist na tayo, communist. No. You keep the democratic and capitalist structure, but you emphasize a lot of you introduce the capabilities approach now. Kasi you introduce a lot of welfare things, no, that can help people in terms of upward mobility, no. Realize their potential, level the playing field so that they themselves can lift themselves out of poverty. It's not us dictating what people will do, but providing the services that people will need. So going back to the capabilities approach, so this paradigm is kind of like infusing Adam Smith with the capabilities approach, with government keeping the Adam Smith part in check. So that's social democracy for you. And I will share materials for you in this class as an added knowledge. A lot of Jesuits subscribe to this idea, especially when you study the theory of liberation next year, Theo 141. This is a popular popular paradigm. But again, this is not a official Ateneo stance. But there is. All right, so that ends the class tonight. I don't know if you guys have questions on the last part or any part, etc. If you're confused about things or about the assignment, let me know about my announcements, anything. What do you guys think? No questions though. Anyone before we end? If you're still awake, I hope it wasn't too boring. Sorry, there is one question. Sir, is it possible for positive externalities to cause market failure? The two are not actually related. Kasi, they're not related. Kasi market failure is, actually, it can actually avoid market failure, some types of market failure. So for example, going back to my example, they're not related, but you can sort of connect them in a way. It can address actually some market failure. So let's say, going back to my example, I'm an agribusiness. I buy produce produce from different farms. But baku-baku yung daan, it's not paved, so I have the money, and I think I'm going to recover my money eventually. I'll build a road, to connect my business to the farms. So that is a positive externality for everyone, kasi everyone will benefit. And to a certain extent, it solves a particular market failure. Kasi dati, the market failure was no one was providing them with a road so that they can easily transport their goods. Ngayon, I am addressing one type of market failure. So pwede mong i-connect, no? But it doesn't necessarily address all market failures that there are. So I hope that made sense, Ravi. Sir, can we use the concepts? Absolutely. If you want, if it will make sense. So yes, definitely. You can use the concepts tonight, no, in the discussion. And if you want more information, again, the entire module 3 is on Canvas. So you can pick and choose from there. Definitely. All right. So again, Saturday, deadline, no, October 2. So, okay na tayo? You guys are ready for dinner, I think. All right. Have a good evening, guys. I'll see you next week. Thank you very much.
Thank
Thank you,
sir.
sir.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you, sir.